Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Ainul Nazifa binti Zubir. My student ID 2020495462 and my supervisor is Dr. Chalida Somsa. Welcome to my presentation to all panelists and all the viewers. So today I'm going to present about my Viva, that is the determinant of firm's profitability in the food beverage industry. So let's move to the first part, which is introduction. The food and beverages sector are the company that engage in food processing, packaging and distribution. Recently, the profitability in the food and beverages sector has become one of the main sectors that can generate the country's income, and every year the GDP will increase due to this sector, and it's expected to expand more by year 2050. In the review provided by World Bank on Malaysia's current situation, they also highlighted in the importance of food in terms of nutritional development in humans, especially in children who may facing stunted growth due to the lack of food nutrition. However, there are also some problems consuming food as they were living in absolute poverty, not to mention obtaining a nutrition daily healthy diet where they barely make enough to live. Malaysia has always been a very consistent in growth and becoming a developing country. Malaysia mainly actively participating in economic activities for past years since gaining independence. Malaysia has successfully diversified its economy from one that was initially agriculture and commodity based to one that now play host to robust manufacturing and service sector, which have propelled the country to becoming a leading exporter of electrical appliance part and component. Nevertheless, the growth of Malaysia's economy seemed to slow down recent years due to the pandemic COVID-19. The pandemic has caused a lot of casualties to the country, mainly affected were the suppliers and the consumers. Moreover, during the Movement Control Order (MCO), where it lasts for almost 1 year and 7 months, many Malaysians are facing difficulty in financial. As in illustration, a great number of business owners have started to close their business, particularly in food and beverage sector. Furthermore, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine also may affect Malaysia food and beverage sector. The war that happened has caused in the world in charge, as Ukraine is one of the world seed oil and wheat exporter. Even though Malaysia do not engage heavily in the trade between Ukraine, Malaysia mainly imported fertilizer from Russia. Last but not least, food inflation is also becoming one of the factors for the increase in price of food. Food inflation can be defined as the inflation that the country is facing is hitting the food price significantly. When the inflation took place, the food prices increased in a short period, and it can be more than 100% than previous price. The consumer groceries bill increase and they must pay more money for the same quantity of food. Even worse, the consumer need to cut their expenses for food in order to save their hard-earned money. Next, we move to the research objective. The goal of this study is to offer more information and empirical support for the factors that affect the food and beverage industry profitability in the current environment. The primary contribution on this research aims to further explore the consequences of profitability factor for the Malaysian food and beverage industry. The goal is to highlight the connection between leverage, liquidity, industry affiliation, growth, and productivity. The first objective is to examine the relationship between the leverage and firm profitability in the food and beverages sector. Second, to identify the relationship between liquidity and firm profitability in the food and beverages sector. Third is to investigate the effect of industry affiliation and firm profitability in the food and beverages sector. Four, explore the effect of growth factor and firm profitability in the food and beverages sector. The last one is to determine the impact of productivity on the firm profitability in the food and beverages sector. For the scope and limitation of the study, the researcher strictly focuses on food and beverage industry in Malaysia. It does not include any analysis of subsector of the industry such as restaurants, hotel and others. Only 35 companies were able to fulfill the requirement needed during the period this study. Then we move to the literature review. First theory is the modern capital structure theory, which was established in 1958 by Franco Modigliani and Merton Miller. According to this theory, when the capital market is effective or perfect, a firm choice of capital structure has no impact on the value of the company because there are no taxes imposed, issuance costs associated with raising capital through debt or equity, and there are also no agency costs. The second theory in this study is signaling theory, which explains why the company presents information to the capital market. According to this theory, high profitability is related to good company prospect, which causes investors to increase stock demand. And the last theory is the cash conversion cycle theory and the operating cycle theory as two theories that explain liquidity management. This is the theoretical framework that we create in this study, which the independent variable is leverage, liquidity, industry affiliation, growth, and productivity. Meanwhile, the dependent variable is firm profitability. This table provides the result of the hypothesis from the independent variables of leverage, liquidity, growth, industry affiliation, and also productivity with dependent variable of return on equity ROE that we use in this study. Next, we move to the methodology. As we can see, this is the formula that we use to collect the data for each variables. For diagnostic check consists normality test. The Jarque-Bera test is one of the most frequently used method to determine normality. Jarque-Bera test make use of the feature of a normally distributed random variable, which state that the first two movement, which is the mean and the variance. To accept the null hypothesis, the p-value should be greater than 5%, means that the data is normally distributed, while if the p-value is lower than 5%, it means that the data is not normally distributed. Thus, the null hypothesis must be rejected. The skewness and kurtosis of a distribution are its standard third and fourth moment, respectively. Kurtosis and skewness are metric for how a distribution is asymmetric regarding its mean value and the size of its tail, respectively. A normal distribution is one that is not skewed and has kurtosis coefficient of 3. The negative value means the distribution of the data is negatively skewed, while positive value means the distribution of the data is positively skewed. This table illustrates the result of the normality test conducted for this research. The coefficient of kurtosis for this is higher than 3 for all variables except for leverage, which is lower than 3. The kurtosis for leverage is a platykurtic distribution, while for the other variables, the kurtosis is leptokurtic distribution. Moreover, the p-value for the growth, industry affiliation, productivity, and liquidity are greater than 5%, which means that the data is normally distributed. For leverage, the p-value is lower than 5%. It indicates that the data is not normally distributed. From this table, the coefficient value for leverage variables stand at 0.099252. This indicates that the relationship between leverage and firm's profitability is negative. If there is a decrease in leverage, it does not result in the firm's profitability. The leverage is proven to have insignificant influence on firm's profitability, ROE, because the p-value is lower than 5%. Next, the coefficient value for liquidity variables stand at negative 0.127243. This means that there is a negative relationship between liquidity variables and profitability. It means that if there is a decrease in liquidity, it does not lead to the profitability. In addition, liquidity is proven to have a significant influence in ROE as the p-value is lower than 5%. Furthermore, the coefficient value for industry affiliation variables stand at 2.84. This means that there is a positive relationship between industry affiliation variables and profitability. It means if there is an increase in industry affiliation, it will also lead to increase in profitability. However, the industry affiliation does not have significant influence on profitability as it's recorded its p-value higher than 5%. The coefficient for the growth variable stand at 0.103219. This means that there is a positive relationship between growth variables and profitability. It means if there is an increase in growth, it will also lead to an increase in profitability. The growth variable also has a significant effect on ROE as the p-value recorded lower than 5%. For the last variable is productivity. The coefficient value for productivity variables stand at 8.71. This means that there is a positive relationship between productivity variables and profitability. It means if there is an increase in productivity, it will also lead to an increase in profitability. In the meantime, productivity variable has significant influence on profitability, ROE, as it's recorded its p-value is lower than 5%. The R-square show how successful the variable is in predicting. In this study, the R-square proved the variables are positive and high as is recorded the value is 0.64. The R-square implies that about 64.62% of changes in ROA are explained by the changes in independent variables such as leverage, liquidity, growth, industry affiliation, and also productivity. In the meantime, the remaining 35.38% is influenced by other variables. For the adjust R-square, it shows that the value is 0.585 as it is more than 0.5 and also can close to 1. It can be considered that the variable is significant influence as the value are in positive. Meanwhile, the F statistic show the significant outcome of leverage, liquidity, growth, industry affiliation, and productivity on the ROE. It can be defined as the higher the F static, the better for the model. In this study can be explained by looking at the problem F static to decide the overall significance of all independent variables. Next, we move to the significance of study. This study is expected to extend the breadth and depth of knowledge regarding the determinant of firms' profitability in the food and beverages sector. Besides, the study is expected to distinguish between the theoretical aspect and practical perspective to bring new insight in order to identify the real factor that influence firm profitability in the food and beverages sector. From the theoretical aspect, it is expected that this study will fill the knowledge gap between the factor that influence the firm's profitability in the food and beverages sector. From the literature review, the food and beverages sector are the very important segment for any country's economy. Each country tries to meet the nutritional needs of its population with its own production and to minimize food import dependency. The importance of the food and beverages industry is reflective in the size, growth, and performance of this industry relative to the other sector. Food and beverages industry involve companies that mainly belong to the most successful companies, and in comparison to other manufacturing industry, it is exactly this industry that achieve the highest total revenue and employs the largest number of people. As a result of reviewing earlier research, it can be concluded that the profitability in this industry is typically stated as a function of both internal and external factor. The first internal factor refer to the element derived from financial statement for food and beverage industry, and they might be referred to as aspect unique in terms of profitability. The element in the external factor describe microeconomic determinants that have an impact on the operation of the firms but unrelated to the company's management. In order to have better results, future researchers must have more accurate and wide range of companies, including all firms in food and beverage industry in Malaysia. Ideally, future researchers can consider other variables in determining the profitability of firms engaged in the F&B sector. Next suggestion is that future researchers can reconsider the criteria used in future study in order to contain more information as most company included can assist in more accurate data. Besides, this research only uses the software from EVS 12 system and Refinitiv Econ to get the necessary data. It is advised for future researchers to use more method in collecting data to find their model that can produce more accurate and detailed results, as different methods can produce different results. Furthermore, it is also advisable to future researchers to do research over the same sector but including different countries. The result will be more precise and specific on which variable can influence the firm profitability in the food and beverage industry.